Hi, and thanks for joining me for the first in what I hope will be a series of videos on growing vegetables successfully at home with minimum fuss and maximum sustainability. First things first, we need to think about soil. This is some compost that I created over the last few years. These are from my compost bins, and you will see unfortunately we've got plastic tea bags in there, which I didn't know weren't biodegradable. In fact, I didn't know they had plastic in them, and all sorts of other bits and pieces, including some avocado skins and all sorts. This at this moment in time is not appropriate for growing seeds for two reasons. One, it's too wet because this is very claggy, very rich, very dark. It squeezes together and holds its shape. And it's also too high fertility for raising seeds. Now that might seem counterintuitive because you think, well, seeds need fertile soil. Well, they do, but if it's too high a fertility, they will grow fast, but they won't produce very strong plants. Plants need a little bit of adversity to give them a good start in life, so that makes them grow stronger ultimately over their lifespan. So, how do I turn this into something that's actually a useful growing medium? Well, I use whatever I've got to hand, and in my case, what I've actually got is plenty of spent compost from last year. So this is from the growing season last year. It's been indoors over winter, so it's really dry, and because it had squash and tomatoes growing in it, it actually means that it's actually quite nutrient depleted because they're both very heavy feeders because they are fruiting plants. So I take this and I mix it with this, but the important part is, and I need a spare bucket for this obviously, I put it through one of these sieves as I mix it. And this is to get the big bits out, the plastic bits and all the other random things that end up in your compost heap that aren't particularly helpful. And once you've done that, and it is quite a bit of hard work, but it's good exercise, and don't forget you're getting free soil at the end of it, so it's well worth it doing a couple of buckets at a time, you end up with this lovely product here. So this is probably around about a 50-50 mix between the compost from the bin and the stuff that I had available. And you can also use things like sand, weed-free topsoil, or any combination of things, as long as you're breaking this down and mixing it with something else. What you end up with, if you've mixed it well, is a very fine tilled soil with very few bits in it, and importantly, it's not wet. So this has had a couple of days extra to dry out, but as soon as I mixed it with the dry material, it sucked the moisture right out of that stuff and spread it around more easily. So I'd highly recommend this method for producing soil because although it will take a little bit of effort, it's free and it's completely sustainable. And it really is important to stress that you do not need to buy seeding compost. This is expensive and it also contains peat, so if you are trying to support sustainability, you should not be buying that type of compost. This time I'm going to be talking to you about what you can put your seeds in. If you happen to have a lot of plastic pots lying around, then that's great, obviously use them. However, one word of warning, you do need to make sure they are very clean, and to do that you are going to need to use soap and hot water. If you don't do this, there's a strong risk that you might be spreading various fungal diseases around, including the dreaded damping off fungus, which causes your seedlings to either fail to germinate or they will die off shortly afterwards. So to avoid that frustration, always make sure that your materials are very clean. Alternatively, you might want to make a biodegradable pot like this, and we know that this is going to be clean. So this is a strip of newspaper. I got this for free from the shop, so very sustainable. And this was actually a tabloid sheet folded into 4 and cut along or torn along the edges of where the folds are, and that gives you 4 strips of paper. So, how do we make a pot? First of all, you need a cylindrical object to roll it around. I've seen some people use baked bean tins and all sorts, but they're a little bit large in my opinion. I'd rather use something this size because I'm trying to create a pot either for a single seed or maybe possibly for 2 or 3 seeds together if they're quite small plants that don't mind growing together. So how do we do this? We need to make sure that the majority of the paper, say about 2/3 to 3/4, is actually over the bottle, with a little bit extra at the end because we're going to fold that in at the bottom to make it nice and secure. The important thing is you need to make sure that this isn't too tight as you go, because otherwise it won't come off later. So as you fold this in at the bottom, keep going, keep folding in, and you might begin to see that this is slowly beginning to taper, and that will help with the stability of the pot if you can get it to taper a little bit. There is a bit of an art to this, but after you've done a couple of pots, I reckon you'll be an expert at doing this. Now you can buy various things to do this with, but let's save some money and have a go at doing it this way. The important thing is you do need to tuck it in well at the bottom, use palm of your hands, your thumbs, and just make sure all of that is nicely flattened. And that way, when you slide it off, there we go, we've got a perfect little pot there. So the advantage of this is you can pop it straight in the ground, it will biodegrade, and you can make them for next to nothing. Another way of making biodegradable pots is to use toilet roll tubes, and I'm sure many of you have got plenty of these lying around at the moment. So you can use them as is. You can top them up with compost while they're already in a tray. This is a tray that I bought some mushrooms in. Do make sure you wash it before use, obviously. But I actually prefer to make a proper pot. In order to do that, you're going to take your toilet roll and you make incisions, cuts along around about 15 millimetres long. And I tend to rotate it like this, so I'm doing them at opposite points, and that allows you to get them more evenly spread. Think about doing them along the 4 points of the compass, like so. And then you're simply going to fold those flaps in. And it does help if your cuts are relatively even here, it helps the folding process a little bit. And there we go. So if it doesn't quite stand up, do give it a thorough press against the table, and there you go, and you can pop that in there. So these toilet roll tubes are actually a perfect length for growing things like peas and beans because they tend to have longer root systems.